Talk less, influence more. Welcome to Audiobook Soundz, Chasing Greatness. Influence isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about talking the most, explaining the most, or adding the most details. Influence is built on discipline. The discipline to hold back, to control your impulses, to speak with intention instead of insecurity. Most people talk because silence feels uncomfortable. They talk to fill space. They talk to be liked. They talk because they fear being forgotten. They talk because the mind equates words with value. But the truth is the opposite. The more disciplined you are with your speech, the more powerful you become. People respect the person who doesn't rush to speak. They pay attention to the person who doesn't need to dominate the conversation. They trust the person who listens more than they talk. When you speak less, your presence grows. Your words carry more weight. Your communication becomes sharper, clearer, more controlled. And people begin to lean in, not because you demand attention, but because you don't. This audiobook is not just about communication. It's about psychological self-control. It's about rewiring your instincts so silence becomes natural, not uncomfortable. So your words become tools, not reactions. So your presence becomes influence, not noise. If you're ready to speak less, influence more, and step into the version of yourself that commands respect without trying, then let's begin. Chapter 1. The Psychology Behind Speaking Less. Most people assume influence begins with talking, but true influence begins long before words are spoken, because the human mind assigns power not to the person who speaks the most, but to the person who speaks with the most intention, the most discipline, and the most control. When you speak less, something powerful happens in the minds of others. They begin to pay closer attention to you, not because you demand it, but because your silence signals confidence, authority, and self-control in a way that excessive talking never can. Psychology shows us that the brain naturally trusts people who don't overshare, don't rush to respond, and don't feel the need to dominate every silence, because the mind interprets restraint as a sign of emotional stability and inner strength. When someone speaks constantly, the brain quietly interprets it as nervousness, insecurity, or a desire for approval, but when someone chooses their words carefully and doesn't rush to fill the air, the brain reads it as a sign of calm certainty, and certainty is one of the strongest foundations of influence. The truth is simple. The more disciplined you are with your words, the more powerful your presence becomes. When you speak less, people pay more attention to what you actually say, because your words are not competing with noise, filler, or nervous commentary. They stand out. They feel intentional. They carry weight. People remember them not because they were loud, but because they were deliberate and well-chosen. This happens because of one core psychological principle: scarcity creates value. The brain assigns higher importance to anything that appears in limited supply, and your words are no different. If you talk endlessly, your words become cheap and forgettable, but if you speak only when necessary, people instinctively treat your words as meaningful even before they know what you will say. Your silence primes the room, prepares minds to listen, and elevates your presence without you having to push for respect or attention. Speaking less also gives you an incredible advantage that most people overlook: the ability to see and understand more than anyone else in the room. When you're not racing to talk, you start observing details that others miss: the tone in someone's sentence, the intention behind their question, the shift in their posture, the insecurity hidden inside their answer. You begin to understand people more deeply, because while they are focused on expressing themselves, you are focused on understanding them, and the person who understands always influences more than the person who simply reacts. This shift from constant speaking to intentional silence also protects you from emotional impulsiveness, because the more you talk, the more likely you are to respond out of emotion, not clarity, and the more likely you are to say things that weaken your position or reveal more than you intended. But when you speak less, you give yourself time. Time to think, time to breathe, time to choose words that guide the conversation instead of words that simply release emotion. You move from being reactive to being strategic, and that transformation is what separates disciplined communicators from impulsive ones. People quickly begin to notice this change. They sense your calm. They sense your control. They sense that you are not driven by insecurity or the need for constant verbal expression. This quiet strength makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability creates power, because when people cannot easily read you or provoke you, they automatically treat you with more caution and more respect. Speaking less is not about being quiet for the sake of being quiet. It is about being in control of your presence. It is about choosing intentional communication over impulsive expression. It is about building a reputation for having words that matter instead of words that simply fill space. And as you practice this discipline, you will notice something remarkable. You begin to respect yourself more. You begin to trust your own judgment more. You begin to feel less pressure to perform and more inner certainty in who you are. This is where influence truly begins, when your presence says more than your voice, and your restraint says more about your confidence than any long speech ever could. Speaking less is not just a communication skill, it is a psychological power that transforms how people perceive you, respond to you, and remember you. And mastering this discipline is the first step toward becoming someone whose words carry real impact, real authority, and real influence. Chapter 2: The Discipline of Pausing Before You Speak. Most people live their lives speaking on impulse, responding to every question, comment, or emotion the very moment it appears in their mind, but what they don't realize is that every instant reaction reveals something about them: their insecurities, their impatience, their emotional triggers, their lack of self-control. And because they speak as soon as they feel, they often say things that weaken their presence instead of strengthening it. The discipline of pausing before you speak is one of the most powerful tools you can develop, because the pause creates space between emotion and expression, between impulse and intention, and in that space you regain control over your voice, your thoughts, and your influence. A person who pauses is not unsure. They are measured. They are not hesitant. They are intentional. They are not slow. They are choosing clarity over speed. When you pause before speaking, even for a second, even for a breath, people interpret it as confidence, because the mind naturally associates calm pacing with authority, emotional control, and higher intelligence. The person who responds too quickly often appears reactive, defensive, or insecure, but the person who takes a moment before answering appears thoughtful, grounded, and steady. Pausing also disrupts emotional momentum. When you feel irritated or triggered, your instinct is to speak immediately, but that instinct is almost always based on emotion rather than clarity. The pause interrupts that emotional surge, allowing your rational mind to catch up, settle, and choose a response that reflects your values, not your temporary feelings. This simple shift transforms the quality of your communication, because you stop saying things that escalate conflict or weaken your position, and instead speak in a way that maintains control and preserves your influence. Another reason the pause is so powerful is that it shifts the focus of the conversation. When you pause after someone finishes speaking, they begin to feel the weight of their own words. They start thinking more deeply about what they said. They become more aware of your presence. Silence, when used intentionally, creates a subtle tension that draws attention toward you, and people become more invested in hearing what you will say next precisely because you didn't rush to say it. Leaders, negotiators, and emotionally disciplined people use the pause as a deliberate strategy because it gives them time to analyze the emotional tone of the moment, the intention behind someone's words, and the best direction to guide the conversation. The pause allows them to choose not only what to say, but whether the moment deserves a response at all. And this level of selectivity is one of the deepest forms of social power. When you pause before speaking, you are showing that you are not controlled by the moment. you are controlling the moment. Pausing also changes the internal experience of communication. When you stop reacting instantly, you begin to hear yourself think more clearly. You become more aware of your body, your breathing, your emotions, and your instincts. You start to separate real thoughts from emotional noise, and this separation gives you a level of self-awareness that impulsive speakers never develop. You become someone who responds, not someone who reacts, and people feel the difference immediately. The pause also makes your words more impactful, because anything delayed feels more considered. When you speak right away, your words feel casual and unfiltered, but when your speech follows a moment of calm, attentive silence, your words feel chosen, valuable, and worth listening to. People naturally lean in mentally and physically because your timing signals that you are not speaking from insecurity or urgency, you are speaking from intention. Developing this discipline requires conscious practice. In your next conversation, when someone finishes speaking, resist the urge to reply immediately. Let a short, natural pause exist. When someone says something triggering, breathe before responding. Give yourself that space to regain clarity. When someone challenges you, don't rush to defend yourself. Let your silence communicate that you don't feel threatened. Over time, pausing becomes your default state, a calm anchor that steadies you in every interaction. The more you practice pausing before you speak, the stronger your presence becomes, because your silence begins to carry meaning. People recognize that you are not driven by emotion or ego, you are guided by discipline and clarity. They sense that your words matter because you choose them carefully. They sense that you cannot be manipulated through urgency or provocation. They sense that you hold yourself to a higher standard of communication than most people ever will. The pause turns your speech into a conscious choice instead of an emotional release. It transforms your communication from reactive noise into intentional influence. It allows you to lead conversations instead of being pulled into them. And above all, it gives you the power to maintain your inner stability no matter what pressures surround you. When you master the pause, you master your voice. When you master your voice, you master your presence. And when you master your presence, you begin to influence the world not through force, but through discipline, clarity, and calm authority. Chapter 3: Build respect before confidence. Confidence is often talked about as if it appears out of nowhere, as if some people are simply born with it while others spend their entire lives searching for it. But real, lasting confidence doesn't start with louder speech, bolder actions, or even positive thinking. It starts with something much deeper: self-respect. You cannot feel powerful if you don't respect yourself first. If you treat yourself poorly, speak to yourself harshly, break promises to yourself, or tolerate things that go against your values, then no amount of external compliments, achievements, or applause will give you real confidence. It will all feel temporary, surface level, fragile. Self-respect is the foundation that confidence stands on. Without it, confidence collapses the moment life challenges you. Think about how you treat someone you truly respect. You listen to them. You value their time. You don't speak to them carelessly. You trust their decisions. You believe their words have weight. Now ask yourself honestly, do you treat yourself that way? Most people don't. They criticize themselves relentlessly. They let others interrupt or disrespect them. They say yes when they mean no. They break their own commitments without hesitation. They tolerate behaviors that drain their energy and their dignity. And then they wonder why they struggle to feel confident. The truth is simple. You cannot feel confident in a person you don't respect. And the person you need to respect first is yourself. Self-respect is built in quiet, personal moments. It grows through small but powerful choices. When you wake up at the time you promised yourself, even when you don't feel like it, you strengthen respect. When you walk away from someone who disrespects you, instead of trying to win their approval, you strengthen respect. When you finish the task you committed to, even when it's inconvenient, you strengthen respect. Each of these small choices adds up. Over time, they create a sense of reliability within you. a feeling that you can depend on yourself. And when you trust yourself, you naturally start carrying yourself with more confidence. It becomes part of your identity, not something you fake. Consider the opposite. Think about what happens when you break your own promises repeatedly. You say you'll start working on your goals tomorrow, and you don't. You say you'll stop tolerating certain behavior, but you allow it again. You say you'll focus on yourself, but you continue to neglect your needs. Every time you break your own word, you teach your mind a message. My commitments to myself don't matter. My boundaries don't matter. My time doesn't matter. How can confidence grow from that? Self-respect is not built through perfection. It is built through consistency, through daily habits that train your mind to take you seriously. When you stop treating yourself as optional and start treating yourself as valuable, everything in your life begins to shift. And something else happens. People feel the shift too. Human beings read energy quickly. When someone respects themselves, you can see it in how they speak, how they walk, how they handle conversations, how they enforce boundaries, and how they make decisions. People are drawn to those with self-respect because it communicates stability and strength. You stop being someone who can be easily manipulated, guilt-tripped, or pushed around. Instead, you become someone whose presence naturally demands better treatment. And here's the most important part. When you respect yourself deeply, you no longer chase respect from others. You don't beg for recognition. You don't need approval. You don't try to prove your worth. You already know it. And people respond to that energy with more respect than you could ever earn through trying. So how do you build real self-respect? Start small and start immediately. Take one area of your life where you've been letting yourself down. Maybe it's your health, your personal boundaries, your goals, or your environment. Ask yourself, what is one promise I can make to myself today? Something simple, something doable, something meaningful. Then follow through, no excuses, no delays. Even the smallest act of follow-through begins rewriting the way you see yourself. Next, look at the places where others have been overstepping. Maybe people interrupt you constantly. Maybe someone speaks to you in a way that diminishes you. Maybe you take on tasks that aren't yours because you fear conflict. Decide today that the next time it happens, you will address it calmly and clearly. You don't need anger. You don't need to be dramatic. You simply need to stand firm. Respect is not loud. Respect is not forceful. Respect is quiet strength, the kind of strength that says, I will not lower my standards for anyone, including myself. Finally, treat yourself the way you would treat someone you admire. Speak to yourself with encouragement instead of cruelty. Protect your peace. Prioritize your time. Value your needs. The more you respect yourself, the less room you'll have for anything that doesn't align with that standard. Confidence without respect is empty. But confidence built on respect becomes unbreakable. You move differently. You speak differently. Opportunities flow to you because you carry yourself like someone who knows their worth, not someone waiting for others to confirm it. Self-respect is the quiet engine behind everything else. Build it, protect it, and live by it. And your confidence will no longer be something you chase. It will be something you embody. Chapter 4. How Overtalking Weakens Your Presence. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to develop real influence is that they talk far more than they need to, and the more they talk, the more they unintentionally weaken their presence, because when words are used without intention, without discipline, and without awareness, they begin to lose weight, and when your words lose weight, people stop feeling the need to pay close attention to what you say. Overtalking almost always comes from the same psychological roots: the desire to be understood, the desire to be liked, the desire to fill silence, and the fear of being judged for saying too little. But ironically, these exact behaviors create the very problems people are trying to avoid. When someone talks excessively, the brain of the listener begins to tune out, not because the content is unimportant, but because the rhythm is uncontrolled and the speech feels driven by insecurity rather than clarity. Human attention is limited. When you overload it with unnecessary words, it naturally starts to drift. A person who tries too hard to be heard ends up being ignored, while a person who speaks less but with intention becomes someone others instinctively listen to. This is one of the great paradoxes of communication. Saying more rarely makes your message stronger, but saying less almost always does. Overtalking also reveals emotional patterns that people can quickly detect. When you speak too much, you expose your fears, your doubts, your need for validation, and your lack of inner grounding, because constant speech is usually an attempt to manage internal uncertainty. You can hear it in someone's tone, their pacing, their nervous laughter, their rambling details, all signals that the person is not standing fully in their confidence. On the other hand, the person who speaks less communicates a completely different psychological message. They signal calmness, certainty, and control. They don't need to win attention. Their restraint naturally draws it in. The more you talk, the more likely you are to say something that weakens your standing, because extended speech increases the chances of contradiction, emotional outbursts, unnecessary revelations, and statements you never needed to make. Every extra sentence becomes another doorway for misinterpretation or regret. This is why people often walk away from long conversations feeling exposed, embarrassed, or misunderstood, not because they intended to be, but because their speech lacked discipline, and discipline is the filter that protects your presence. Consider how powerful individuals speak. They rarely explain themselves excessively. They rarely use more words than necessary. They don't rush to prove themselves, defend themselves, or fill silence just to ease tension. Their confidence is communicated through minimal, intentional, and deliberate speech. They say exactly what they need to say, nothing more, and because of this, their words carry an authority that overtalkers never achieve. People trust their voice more because their speech feels measured, grounded, and emotionally controlled. Overtalking also shifts the power dynamic in conversations. The person who talks the most is often the one giving away the most information. They reveal their thoughts, their weaknesses, their frustrations, their desires, and their vulnerabilities, while the quieter person listens, analyzes, and understands the situation with far greater clarity. Information is power, and the person who speaks less usually ends up holding more of it. The overtalker walks away empty, drained, and often unaware of how much they gave away, while the listener walks away informed, steady, and in control. Another way overtalking weakens your presence is by creating emotional noise. When you talk too much, people can't tell which parts of your message matter and which parts don't. Everything you say blends together into a single fog of words, and your important points get lost inside the clutter. But when you speak less, the mind naturally highlights your words because scarcity creates significance. A person who speaks rarely forces others to interpret and consider every word, while a person who speaks constantly makes it easy for others to dismiss half of what they say without thinking. There is also a deeper psychological effect at play. People associate quietness with strength. In movies, in leadership, in real life, the characters who speak less are always portrayed as more powerful, more mysterious, more grounded. They don't rush. They don't explain. They don't overshare. Their silence creates a presence that talking could never create. And this isn't fiction. It reflects how the human mind actually works. We instinctively respect the person who doesn't feel the need to fill the room with their voice. Breaking the habit of overtalking is a matter of awareness and discipline. You must begin noticing the moments where you speak out of nervousness rather than intention. You must catch yourself when you begin explaining something repeatedly, adding unnecessary details, or talking simply because silence makes you uncomfortable. Instead of filling the space, allow the space to exist. Instead of talking more, slow your pace. Let your thoughts settle before turning them into speech. If someone challenges you, don't rush to defend yourself. If someone waits for you to talk, don't feel pressured to satisfy that expectation. Restraint is strength. As you begin speaking less, you will discover something unexpected. People will start listening more. They will treat your words with more seriousness. They will feel the weight of your pauses. They will pay closer attention to your tone, your body language, and your presence. You will notice people stopping mid-sentence to hear your thoughts, not because you demanded it, but because your silence earned it. When you discipline your speech, you discipline your mind. And when you discipline your mind, your influence becomes natural, calm, and unmistakable. Overtalking drains your presence. Intentional speech strengthens it. The less you say, the more people feel the need to hear you. This is how you move from noise to power, from reactive communication to influential communication, from being overlooked to being quietly respected. Chapter 5. Speak only with intention. Most people speak as a reflex, not as a choice, filling conversations with unnecessary details, excessive explanations, and words that carry no real purpose. But the truth is that influence is not built through the quantity of your speech. It is built through the quality of your intention, because intentional speech creates clarity, confidence, and authority, while uncontrolled speech creates confusion, insecurity, and noise. Speaking only with intention means you stop using words to seek approval, to soften silence, to entertain anxiety, or to prove your worth, and instead begin using your voice as a strategic tool, one that communicates exactly what is needed and nothing more. When you speak intentionally, every word becomes deliberate, every sentence becomes meaningful, and your communication begins to reflect a deeper level of self-respect, because choosing your words shows that you value your time, your energy, and your presence too much to waste them on careless expression. Intentional speech also shows others that you are someone who thinks before reacting, someone who listens before responding, and someone who communicates with purpose rather than impulse. And these qualities make people instinctively trust you more, because trust is built through consistency, clarity, and emotional control. The problem is that most people don't speak intentionally because they don't pause long enough to ask themselves why they are saying what they're saying. They speak because they feel discomfort in silence, because they want reassurance, because they fear judgment, or because they feel pressured to deliver instant responses. These emotional triggers lead to overtalking, rambling, explaining, defending, and revealing far more than necessary, and every unnecessary word dilutes your presence. When your speech is reactive, it becomes a window through which others can see your insecurities. When your speech is intentional, it becomes a shield that exposes only what you choose to reveal. To speak intentionally means to ask yourself, before you open your mouth, whether the words you are about to say serve a purpose. It means asking whether your message is clear, whether the moment requires your voice, whether the silence would actually communicate more than any sentence you could deliver, and whether speaking will add value or simply add noise. When you begin filtering your thoughts through intention, you immediately become more powerful, because the ability to withhold unnecessary words is a sign of maturity and self-command. Intentional speech also transforms the way people perceive you. When your words are precise and controlled, people naturally assume you are thoughtful, wise, and confident. They sense that your communication has weight behind it, and they take you more seriously because they can feel that you do not speak from insecurity or ego. People are drawn to those who use their voice sparingly because their restraint creates a kind of psychological gravity, and others instinctively lean toward them, hoping to catch the meaning behind their few but powerful words. There is also a strategic advantage in speaking less but with intention. In conversations, the one who talks the most is often the one who reveals the most, while the one who talks the least gathers the most information. When you speak only with intention, you avoid giving away your emotions, your weaknesses, your frustrations, and your vulnerabilities, and instead you focus on understanding the other person. This gives you a clearer sense of how to navigate the conversation, how to respond in a way that strengthens your position, and how to avoid unnecessary conflict or misunderstanding. Speaking intentionally requires discipline, because the mind often wants to release emotions through speech, And silence sometimes feels like pressure, but once you learn to sit with that pressure, to control your impulses, and to choose your words consciously, you begin to communicate at a higher level than most people ever reach. You begin to understand that silence is not a lack of communication. Silence is part of communication, and sometimes silence is the most powerful message you can send. To build the habit of intentional speech, you must slow down your internal pace. Before you speak, take a breath. Let your thoughts settle. Ask yourself whether your words are necessary. If they are not, save them. If they are, deliver them with calmness, clarity, and confidence. Speak with a tone that reflects intention rather than anxiety. Speak with pacing that shows composure rather than desperation. Speak with clarity that comes from understanding rather than rushing. The more you practice this discipline, the more you will notice a shift in your relationships, your conversations, and the way people respond to you. People will start giving you more respect because they can feel your control. They will stop interrupting you because your words command attention. They will seek your perspective more often because they know you don't speak without reason. Your voice will no longer blend in with noise. It will stand out as something worth listening to. Speaking only with intention means you no longer waste your words, your energy, or your presence, and instead you communicate with a quiet strength that leaves a lasting impression. Your words become sharper, your influence becomes deeper, and your confidence becomes more visible not because you say more, but because you say exactly what needs to be said, nothing less and nothing more. Intentional speech is the foundation of powerful influence. When your voice stops reacting and starts choosing, your presence transforms from ordinary to unforgettable, and people begin to recognize you as someone who communicates not to fill space, but to shape it. Chapter 6: Silence Creates Tension. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication because most people treat silence as something to fear, something to fill, or something that exposes them, yet the truth is that silence, when used intentionally, becomes one of the most powerful tools of influence, creating a psychological tension that draws attention, commands respect, and shifts control of the room without you needing to raise your voice or overextend your words. Silence is not emptiness, it is presence, and when you understand how to use it, you begin to influence people not through what you say, but through the space you create before you say anything at all. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with silence because silence forces them inward. It makes them aware of their own thoughts, their own insecurities, and their own uncertainty, and as a result, they rush to fill the quiet moments with words, explanations, or reactions simply to avoid the discomfort that silence brings. But the person who can remain calm in silence gains a psychological advantage, because they are demonstrating that they are not controlled by that discomfort, that they are not driven by fear of awkwardness, and that they are willing to hold their position while others rush to reveal theirs. When you choose silence in a conversation, especially during moments when others expect you to respond, you create a subtle emotional tension that makes people lean toward you mentally and sometimes physically, because they instinctively want to know what you are thinking, what you are feeling, and what you will say next. This anticipation is powerful. It causes people to pay closer attention, to watch your body language, and to prepare themselves for your next word, which means your influence begins before you even speak. Silence also disrupts predictable patterns. Most conversations operate on an automatic rhythm. Someone speaks, someone replies, and the exchange continues with little awareness. But when you break this rhythm with intentional silence, you reset the power dynamic. You show that you are not reacting automatically. You show that you choose when and how to respond. And in doing so, you subtly take control of the interaction, because the person who controls the pacing of a conversation controls the emotional tone of it as well. Psychologically, silence communicates seriousness. It signals that you are thinking, analyzing, evaluating, or considering your response, and people naturally interpret this as maturity, intelligence, and confidence. They begin adjusting their behavior around you, becoming more careful with their words, more respectful of your presence, and more aware that you do not respond impulsively. This is how silence elevates your status in the minds of others without you having to exert force or speak excessively. There is also a powerful emotional effect behind silence. When you remain silent after someone criticizes you, challenges you, or tries to provoke you, you deny them the emotional reaction they were expecting. This unsettles people, not in a negative way, but in a way that forces them to reconsider their approach. Silence becomes your shield. It becomes the barrier that protects your emotional energy while simultaneously showing others that you cannot be manipulated or pulled into reactive behavior. This is the kind of calm that high-status individuals display naturally, and it is one of the strongest forms of confidence you can develop. In conflict or disagreement, silence becomes even more potent. When someone is heated or emotional, and you respond with controlled silence instead of instantly defending yourself or arguing back, you shift the emotional temperature of the room. Their intensity begins to feel out of place next to your calm, and because emotional contagion is real, your silence often diffuses the chaos rather than adding fuel to it. Over time, people begin to see you as the one who brings stability, not chaos. And this perception increases your influence in any environment. Even in simple conversations, silence gives your words more impact. When you pause before speaking, people lean in. When you pause after speaking, people reflect. Silence frames your message, making each word feel more intentional, more thoughtful, and more meaningful. In a world where people rush through their sentences, the person who masters silence becomes memorable because they communicate with rhythm instead of noise. To practice using silence intentionally, you must begin by resisting the urge to fill every quiet moment. Let silence breathe. Let conversations unfold without forcing your voice into every gap. When someone finishes speaking, let a natural pause exist before you respond. When someone challenges you, allow a moment of silence to settle before you decide how to answer. When an emotional situation arises, use silence to center yourself and observe the room before acting. Over time, silence will stop feeling awkward and start feeling like a tool you can wield with precision. You will gain a deeper sense of control over yourself, your emotions, and your presence. People will listen to you more closely, not because you demand it, but because silence creates the kind of tension that makes people value what comes next. They begin to understand that when you speak with purpose. The true power of silence is that it reveals who is confident and who is not. The one who fears silence exposes their insecurity. The one who controls silence exposes their strength. And when you master this discipline, your influence expands far beyond your words, because people will feel your presence even in the moments where you say nothing at all. Chapter 7. Body Language That Speaks for You. Long before you say a single word, your body is already communicating for you, silently broadcasting messages about your confidence, your certainty, your emotional state, and your sense of self-worth, because human beings are wired to read nonverbal signals faster and more accurately than spoken language, and this is why mastering your body language becomes one of the most powerful ways to influence without speaking. Your posture, your eye contact, your facial expressions, your stillness, and even the way you enter a room all shape how people perceive you, and the person who controls these signals gains a psychological advantage that speaking alone can never provide. Most people underestimate how much their body reveals. When someone slouches, looks down, fidgets nervously, or shifts their weight constantly, their body quietly communicates insecurity, self-doubt, or emotional instability, even if their words try to say otherwise. The mind believes the body more than it believes the voice, which means that confident speech cannot hide uncertain posture. But the opposite is also true. Even minimal, carefully chosen body language can enhance your presence far more effectively than long explanations or loud talking. because people instinctively trust the signals that come from the body more than the noise that comes from the mouth. Influential body language begins with posture. When you stand tall with your shoulders back, your chest open, your neck relaxed, and your spine aligned, you send a signal of strength that speaks louder than any sentence you could say. This posture doesn't have to be exaggerated or rigid. It simply has to show that you are comfortable in your own presence, grounded in your own body, and not shrinking to make yourself smaller. Posture communicates self-respect, and people treat you according to how you treat yourself physically. A strong posture tells the world you belong wherever you are. Eye contact is another powerful form of silent communication. The eyes reveal confidence, authenticity, intention, and emotional stability, and people judge you within seconds based on whether you can hold steady eye contact without flinching, darting your gaze, or looking away too quickly. Confident eye contact does not mean staring aggressively or trying to dominate someone. It simply means meeting someone's gaze with calm steadiness and allowing them to feel your presence. When you hold eye contact just a moment longer than most people do, you create a silent signal that you are not intimidated, not anxious, and not seeking approval. This is why people instinctively respect those who can look them in the eye with composure. Stillness is one of the most underrated forms of body language, yet it carries tremendous power. The person who can remain physically still, not rigid, not frozen, but controlled, communicates emotional discipline and inner calm. Excessive movement, rapid gestures, tapping feet, fiddling hands, or shifting weight are often signs of nervous energy, and they dilute your presence. Stillness, on the other hand, creates a sense of gravity. It makes people pay attention. It creates an aura of control. When you move, move with intention. When you gesture, gesture slowly and confidently. When you sit, occupy your space fully without collapsing into yourself. Controlled stillness signals authority without a single word. Even the way you walk shapes how people perceive you. A confident walk is not aggressive or domineering. It is steady, balanced, and unhurried. The person who walks too fast often communicates anxiety or desperation. The person who walks too slowly may appear uncertain. But the person who walks with a calm, grounded pace, head balanced, shoulders relaxed, steps aligned, communicates quiet confidence, and people pick up on it instantly. Your walk sets the emotional tone before you even reach the conversation. Facial expressions also play a significant role in influence. A neutral, composed face communicates calmness and clarity, while overly animated expressions often signal emotional volatility or a desire for approval. You do not need to smile constantly to appear friendly. In fact, constant smiling can sometimes come across as insecurity or people-pleasing. A controlled, relaxed expression with occasional intentional smiles conveys self-assurance and approachability without sacrificing authority. The clothes you wear, the grooming you maintain, and the physical care you show your body also influence how people perceive you, not because these things measure your worth, but because they communicate intention and self-respect. When you dress with care, you silently tell the world that you value yourself. When you carry yourself with dignity, people respond with dignity. When you show that you pay attention to the small details of your physical presence, people assume you bring that same discipline to your thoughts and actions. The key to powerful body language is consistency. Your posture, your eye contact, your stillness, and your pacing must align with the message you want to communicate. If your words say you are confident but your body says you are uncertain, people believe the body. But when your body and your silence work together, you develop a presence that cannot be ignored. People begin to feel your confidence rather than hear it. They begin to trust your presence before they hear your perspective. They begin to sense your authority without you having to declare it. Mastering body language is not about pretending or performing. It is about removing the physical habits that sabotage your presence and replacing them with signals that reflect your true strength. It is about allowing your body to communicate what your voice no longer has to convince people of. When your body speaks with confidence, you can speak less and still influence more, because your presence becomes the message, and people respond to you not because of what you say, but because of what you silently communicate. Chapter 8. Emotional Discipline. Don't react, don't rush. Long, clean version. One of the strongest indicators of real confidence is emotional discipline, the ability to stay centered when others lose control, to remain calm when the environment becomes chaotic, and to choose thoughtful responses instead of impulsive reactions, because most people are ruled by whatever emotion strikes them in the moment, and this lack of discipline forces them to say things they regret, make decisions they later question, and behave in ways that weaken their influence. Emotional discipline is rare, and because it is rare, it is powerful. When you possess it, people immediately feel it, and without you saying a word, they begin adjusting their behavior around your calmness. Reactivity is the enemy of influence. The moment you react emotionally, whether through anger, frustration, defensiveness, or anxiety, you hand control over to the situation or to the person provoking you. You allow their words, their tone, or their behavior to dictate your internal state, and this gives them psychological leverage over you. But when you refuse to react, when you stay calm even when someone tries to trigger you, you take back that power. You show that your emotions belong to you, not to the world, and this is the foundation of unshakable presence. Most people rush because they believe that speed equals strength, but speed in communication usually reflects fear. Fear of silence, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing control of the conversation, fear of not having an answer quickly enough. But true strength is slow, steady, and deliberate. The person who rushes reveals anxiety. The person who stays calm reveals dominance. There is immense power in taking your time, in breathing before speaking, in thinking before responding. You show others that you are centered enough to choose your next move instead of being pushed into it. When emotions run high, people tend to speak too quickly, interrupt frequently, or escalate situations that could have been defused with one moment of patience. Emotional discipline prevents this by creating a buffer between what you feel and what you express. It doesn't require you to suppress your emotions or pretend they don't exist. It simply means you allow yourself to experience them without surrendering control to them. You understand that emotions are temporary, but the words you say in emotional moments can have long-lasting consequences, and this awareness guides you toward restraint rather than impulsiveness. Staying calm is not passive, it is strategic. It allows you to observe instead of react, to analyze instead of assume, to respond instead of retaliate. When you remain calm, you start noticing details you would have missed if you allowed emotion to take over, the intention behind someone's tone, the insecurity hidden in their words, the fear driving their behavior, or the manipulation behind their approach. Emotional discipline gives you clarity, and clarity gives you influence. There is a psychological shift that happens when you decide not to react emotionally. People begin to respect you more because your calmness makes them feel less defensive and more open. They begin to listen more carefully because your tone is steady and collected. They begin to trust your leadership because you are not swept away by every emotional wave. In challenging conversations, you become the anchor, the one who steadies the situation rather than contributes to the storm, and this single quality separates strong communicators from ordinary ones. Emotional discipline also protects your energy. Every emotional reaction drains you, whether through anger, frustration, fear, or overthinking. But when you learn to remain calm and composed, you conserve that energy for things that matter. You stop feeding negativity. You stop being pulled into unnecessary arguments. You stop carrying the emotional burdens of reactions that were never needed in the first place. Your mind becomes clearer, your days become lighter, and your self-control becomes stronger. To develop emotional discipline, you must train yourself to pause whenever you feel an urge to react. When someone says something provocative, breathe instead of arguing. When a situation becomes stressful, slow your movements instead of rushing. When your emotions rise, lower your voice instead of raising it. These small habits recondition your nervous system, teaching your brain that calmness is your natural state, not chaos. Over time, emotional discipline stops being something you force and becomes something you embody. You also develop emotional discipline by detaching your identity from external outcomes and temporary emotions. When you understand that not every comment deserves a reaction, not every situation requires urgency, and not every feeling needs expression, you begin to live with a quiet internal authority that cannot be disrupted easily. You become someone who is not carried away by the moment, but who carries the moment with intention. This internal steadiness becomes visible to others in your posture, your tone, your silence, and your decision-making. The most powerful people are not those who dominate through aggression or loudness. The most powerful people are the ones who remain calm in moments where others fall apart, who speak with deliberate intention while others scramble for words, and who move with quiet confidence while others are controlled by their emotions. Emotional discipline is what allows you to influence without shouting, lead without forcing, and hold power without demanding it. When you master the ability to not react and not rush, you gain something that cannot be easily taken away: the ability to remain yourself regardless of the situation. You become unshakable not because life stops challenging you, but because you stop surrendering your peace to every challenge. And once you reach this level of emotional stability, your influence deepens, your presence strengthens, and your confidence becomes something people feel even before you speak. Chapter 9. Let others expose themselves. One of the greatest advantages of speaking less is that it gives people the space to reveal themselves fully, because the moment you stop filling conversations with your own words, you allow others to show their intentions, their insecurities, their motives, and their true personalities without even realizing they are doing it. People reveal far more through unfiltered speech than through silence, and the person who listens more than they talk becomes the person with the clearest understanding of everyone around them, which naturally grants them deeper influence, stronger positioning, and greater control over their interactions. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, and because silence makes them aware of their own thoughts, they rush to fill it with explanations, justifications, stories, opinions, and emotional reactions, not realizing that every sentence they add reveals another layer of who they are. When someone is nervous, they talk quickly. When someone is insecure, they overexplain. When someone is trying to impress you, they talk too much about themselves. When someone feels intimidated, they ramble. When someone has hidden intentions, they often reveal them indirectly through tone, phrasing, or inconsistencies. All of this becomes visible the moment you stop competing with their words and simply let them speak. By allowing others to talk more, you place yourself in a position of observation rather than performance, and this is where quiet power is built. You begin to see what drives people: their fears, their desires, their confidence level, their impulsiveness, or their emotional triggers. And once you understand these things, you can navigate relationships, conversations, and decisions with far more clarity than someone who talks impulsively and misses the subtle cues happening right in front of them. Listening is not passive. It is one of the most active forms of psychological strategy, because the person who listens gains information while the person who talks gives information away. Letting others expose themselves also protects you from unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. When you respond too quickly or fill silence prematurely, you often insert assumptions, emotions, or interpretations that may not reflect the truth. But when you allow someone to keep speaking, they often clarify their own meaning, reveal their real intentions, or expose contradictions that would have remained hidden if you had spoken too early. Silence acts like a mirror. The longer someone looks into it, the more they reveal about themselves. Another powerful aspect of letting people talk is that they will often correct themselves or reveal their weaknesses without any confrontation from you. A person who lies tends to talk too much in an effort to make the lie believable, and in doing so, they create unnecessary details that expose the truth. A person who is trying to manipulate you will keep talking until their real motives slip through. A person who is unsure of themselves will reveal their insecurity through stumbles, overexplanations, and exaggerated claims. And the more you stay quiet, the more uncomfortable they become, because your silence forces them to face their own words without the comfort of distraction. When you let others expose themselves, you gain not just information but positioning, because the person who speaks less usually appears more composed, more confident, and more in control. They become someone others instinctively respect because restraint is a sign of power. People may not consciously articulate it, but they feel it. They sense that you cannot be pressured, manipulated, or rushed. They recognize that your silence is intentional, not accidental. And intentional silence creates psychological gravity. It pulls people toward you, while uncontrolled speech pushes people away. This practice also allows you to avoid revealing unnecessary information about yourself. Every extra word you speak gives others something to judge, analyze, or interpret. But when you allow others to speak more, you remain mysterious, unpredictable, and unreadable. People fear what they cannot read, and they respect what they cannot easily understand. Your silence becomes a shield that protects your inner world while simultaneously amplifying the strength of your outer presence. To apply this discipline in daily life, begin by consciously choosing to say less in conversations. When someone tells a story, don't interrupt with your own. When someone expresses an opinion, don't rush to add yours. When someone questions you, give clear answers without unnecessary elaboration. When someone tries to provoke you, let them sit in the silence of their own attempt. As you speak less, notice how much more people reveal. Notice how quickly they try to fill the quiet moments. Notice how their words often expose their intentions more clearly than any direct question ever could. Letting others expose themselves is not about manipulation. It is about clarity. It is about understanding people deeply so that you can navigate life with awareness rather than blind reactions. It is about stepping into a position of quiet influence that does not rely on dominance or loudness, but on observation, patience, and psychological strength. When you make this your habit, you stop being the person who talks the most and becomes the person who understands the most. And in every environment, personal, professional, social, influence flows naturally to the one who understands more than they reveal. Speaking less allows others to show you exactly who they are, and once you learn to see people clearly, you gain a level of power and confidence that cannot be taken away. Chapter 10: The Art of the Short Answer. One of the most overlooked forms of confidence and influence is the ability to give short, clear, controlled answers, because a short answer is not a sign of ignorance or weakness, but a sign of certainty, presence, and emotional discipline. People who lack confidence often feel the need to explain themselves excessively, justify every detail, or offer unnecessary background just to make their response feel complete. But in reality, the more you elaborate without purpose, the more you dilute the strength of your message and the more you reveal your internal uncertainty. The short answer is powerful because it communicates that you do not feel the need to persuade, impress, or convince anyone. It shows that you have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to defend emotionally. When your answer is simple and direct, yes, no, I agree, I don't agree, that works for me, that won't work for me, it signals that you trust your own judgment and that your decision does not require validation from others. People instinctively respect those who can speak clearly without excess, because excess is usually a sign of insecurity, while clarity is a sign of strength. Short answers also remove emotional clutter from communication. When you speak too long, you invite interpretation, misinterpretation, and projection. You give people unnecessary details to analyze, critique, or twist. But when your answer is short and precise, you close the door to confusion and maintain control over the direction of the conversation. Short answers are clean, they cannot be misread easily, and they cannot be used against you as effortlessly as long, emotionally driven explanations can. This doesn't mean you should be cold or dismissive, but rather intentional. A short answer can be warm, respectful, and polite, yet still grounded in confidence. For example, instead of saying, "I'm really sorry, I can't make it because I have a busy day and a lot going on and I don't want to disappoint you," you can simply say, "I won't be able to make it, but thank you for inviting me." The message is clear, confident, and emotionally controlled. You maintain boundaries without flooding the space with excuses or apologies. Short answers also help you avoid oversharing, which is one of the most common ways people weaken their presence. When you explain too much, people begin to sense your insecurity. They start to see the cracks in your emotional armor. They learn your fears, your hesitations, your vulnerabilities, and your triggers. But when you keep your answer short, you reveal only what you choose to reveal, and this maintains your psychological advantage. People cannot easily read someone who speaks concisely, and the harder you are to read, the harder you are to control. The art of the short answer is especially useful in moments of tension, conflict, or negotiation. When someone tries to provoke you or pull you into emotional debate, long explanations give them more room to manipulate the situation. But a short answer, delivered calmly, without emotion, disrupts their momentum completely. If someone insults you or challenges your decision, responding with a short, unshaken statement communicates that their attempt did not reach you emotionally. It shows that you are centered, stable, and not easily pushed. Short answers also demonstrate that you are comfortable with silence. Many people talk too much because they fear the quiet moments between sentences, but the person who is not afraid of silence holds power, because silence forces the other person to sit with their own thoughts. When you give a short answer and stay quiet, people often continue speaking to fill the space, and in doing so, they reveal more than they intended, which benefits you and deepens your influence. There is also an elegance in brevity. When you speak concisely, your communication becomes sharp, focused, and memorable. People remember short, precise statements more easily than long, rambling ones. Think of the great leaders, thinkers, and communicators of history. Many of their most powerful messages were delivered in brief sentences that carried tremendous weight. Brevity is not a lack of depth. It is the distillation of depth into its purest form. To master the art of the short answer, you must first practice resisting the urge to overexplain. When someone asks you a question, pause, then give the simplest accurate response. When someone presses for more information, offer only what is necessary, nothing more. When someone expresses their expectations or desires, respond with clarity rather than stories. When someone challenges you, maintain your calm and answer without emotional overload. Over time, you will begin to feel a shift in the way people interact with you. They will stop questioning your every decision because your clarity speaks for itself. They will treat your words with more seriousness because you no longer use excess speech. They will sense that you are someone who does not give away your energy, your thoughts, or your emotions freely. Your presence will feel stronger, not because you speak more, but because every word you speak carries intention. The art of the short answer is ultimately about grounded confidence. The confidence to speak clearly, the confidence to stand by your decisions, and the confidence to let silence do the work your voice does not need to. When your words are simple and your tone is steady, people begin to see you as someone who is sure of themselves, someone who values their voice, and someone whose presence does not rely on performance. And in a world full of noise, the person who speaks with clarity becomes the person everyone listens to. Chapter 11. Psychological Triggers That Make People Listen. Long, clean version. Getting people to listen to you is not about speaking louder, demanding attention, or trying to dominate conversations. It is about understanding the subtle psychological triggers that naturally draw human attention and create an instinctive desire to take your words seriously, because the mind responds not to volume, but to presence, pacing, tone, emotional control, and the confidence reflected in your timing. When you understand these triggers, you influence others effortlessly, not by force or pressure, but by aligning your communication with the psychological patterns that govern human behavior. One of the strongest triggers is calmness, because people instinctively trust individuals who remain calm under pressure. Calmness signals emotional stability, maturity, and certainty, and the brain interprets these qualities as indicators of leadership. When you speak in a slow, steady tone without rushing, people automatically become more attentive, not because you demand their attention, but because your calmness creates an atmosphere that invites listening. In contrast, fast, nervous speech triggers anxiety in the listener and makes them tune out, because the mind is drawn to steadiness, not chaos. Another powerful trigger is lowering your voice, not to sound intimidating, but to create a sense of depth and seriousness. Lowering your voice slightly, speaking just a bit slower and softer, draws people in because they must lean toward your words, mentally, emotionally, and sometimes physically. Human beings are wired to pay more attention to quiet, deliberate voices than to loud or frantic ones. A lower tone conveys control. A steady tone conveys certainty. Together, they create an immediate psychological impact, making your words feel more credible. A third trigger is using well-timed pauses, which give your message emotional weight and importance. A pause before speaking creates anticipation. A pause after speaking creates reflection. Pauses signal that your words are intentional, not impulsive, and the human brain automatically assigns more value to statements delivered with thoughtful timing. People will remember your words more clearly, not because you spoke more, but because you used silence as punctuation. A well-placed pause makes even a simple sentence feel profound. Another trigger that makes people listen is speaking with precision, choosing your words carefully instead of flooding the moment with unnecessary details. When your language is clean, concise, and intentional, people perceive you as intelligent and trustworthy. The brain prefers clarity because clarity reduces cognitive effort. When someone speaks with precision, the listener experiences less mental friction and more agreement. This is why people who ramble or overexplain lose influence quickly, while people who speak with crisp intention draw attention effortlessly. There is also a psychological trigger in body stillness. When your body is still while you speak, your posture calm, your gestures controlled, your presence grounded, people feel that your words are stable and trustworthy. Excessive movement distracts the mind. Stillness anchors the room. When you speak without fidgeting or shifting restlessly, you project confidence through your physical presence, and the listener's mind naturally gives more weight to what you are saying. This is why powerful leaders often appear calm, steady, and unmoving during critical conversations. Another powerful trigger is certainty. People listen to those who sound like they believe what they are saying. Certainty does not mean arrogance or inflexibility. It means speaking from a place of internal alignment, where your tone matches your intention and your messaging reflects clarity rather than doubt. Even if someone disagrees with you, your certainty will make your words harder to dismiss. Certainty builds trust because it signals emotional grounding. Uncertainty makes people question both your message and your leadership. A subtle yet highly influential trigger is speaking last. When you don't rush to contribute first, when you listen fully before speaking, when you allow others to reveal themselves before you reveal your stance, you gain natural authority. The last speaker often shapes the conclusion of the discussion because the human brain gives more weight to the final input. By speaking last, you leverage timing as a tool of influence. People interpret your patience as wisdom, and your final comments land with greater impact. Another psychological trigger is simplicity, because the brain remembers simple messages far more easily than complex ones. When you remove unnecessary complication from your speech and express your thoughts in a straightforward, grounded manner, people find clarity in your voice. Simplicity does not weaken your message, it strengthens it. People listen to those who make things easier to understand, not harder. Simplicity makes your communication accessible, relatable, and digestible, which increases your influence in any environment. Perhaps one of the most underrated triggers is emotional neutrality, which means not allowing strong emotions, either positive or negative, to distort your message. When you speak without anger, desperation, or neediness, your voice becomes a stabilizing force. People listen more attentively to neutral tones because neutrality allows the message to be heard without emotional noise. Emotional neutrality communicates confidence. You are not begging to be understood, you are simply expressing truth. This quiet emotional stability amplifies your credibility. And finally, one of the greatest triggers of all is consistency. When your tone, your body language, your pacing, and your verbal choices align with your identity. People listen to consistent individuals because consistency builds trust. If your confidence appears only sometimes, people hesitate to rely on you. But when you consistently carry yourself with calmness, clarity, and emotional discipline, your influence becomes predictable and reliable. People feel safe listening to someone whose presence does not fluctuate wildly. When you understand and apply these psychological triggers, calmness, a lower tone, intentional pauses, precision, stillness, certainty, timing, simplicity, neutrality, and consistency, you no longer need to fight for attention. Attention naturally comes to you. You no longer need to speak loudly to be heard. Silence and pacing create impact for you. You no longer need to convince people to listen. Their minds recognize your communication as something worth paying attention to. These triggers turn your voice into an instrument of influence, not through effort or force, but through subtle psychological alignment with how the human brain understands confidence and authority. And once you learn to use these triggers naturally, you begin to experience what true influence feels like. The ability to shape a room without raising your voice, to communicate without over-explaining, and to make people listen not because you demand it, but because your presence quietly commands it. Chapter 12. Influence through presence, not performance. There is a quiet kind of influence that does not come from speaking the loudest, being the most visible, or performing for attention. It comes from presence, the subtle, disciplined way you carry yourself, the calmness you bring into a room, the steadiness of your energy, and the way people instinctively feel your confidence without you needing to announce it. Most people focus on performing, trying to impress others, trying to prove their worth, trying to appear confident by exaggerating, overspeaking, or over-explaining. But performance is fragile because it depends on external validation. Presence, on the other hand, is internal, self-generated, and unshakable, which is why the people who influence the world most deeply are not performers, but individuals who have mastered their internal state. Influence through presence begins with emotional stillness. When you are not easily shaken, when your emotions do not swing wildly in response to every situation, people sense stability in you. They feel grounded in your energy, even when they feel unstable in their own. Calmness itself is a form of influence, because in a world full of emotional chaos, the calm person becomes a point of psychological gravity. They become the anchor in the room. People naturally gravitate toward the one who is unaffected by noise, pressure, or unpredictability. Another element of presence is the strength of your silence. When you no longer feel the need to fill every moment with words or to constantly prove that you belong, you create a quiet tension that others cannot ignore. Your silence becomes meaningful. People begin to sense that there is depth beneath your stillness, intention beneath your quiet, strength behind your restraint. Performance shows desperation, presence shows certainty. The moment you no longer chase attention, attention begins to chase you. Presence is also shaped by your physical energy, your posture, your movement, your eye contact, and the measured way you occupy space. You do not need exaggerated gestures or dramatic expressions to make people feel you. In fact, the quieter and more controlled your physical presence is, the stronger your influence becomes. When you move slowly, speak calmly, and hold steady eye contact without forcing it, you create an aura of confidence that feels natural rather than performative. People respect those who do not try to take space, but simply inhabit it with quiet assurance. Influence through presence also comes from self-respect. When you respect your boundaries, your time, your emotional energy, and your values, you project a different kind of strength, one that does not need to be advertised. People can feel when someone values themselves, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. They treat you with more respect because your presence communicates that you will not accept anything less. This is influence that does not rely on grand speeches or dramatic performance. It is rooted in how you show up, not what you show off. Performance, in contrast, is fueled by insecurity. People perform when they doubt themselves. They speak too much because silence frightens them. They seek approval because they don't trust their own judgment. They exaggerate their confidence because they do not truly feel confident. Performance may impress some people briefly, but it does not create lasting influence, because genuine influence is built on authenticity and consistency, not on theatrics. Presence also grows stronger when you detach from outcomes. When you are no longer obsessed with how others perceive you, whether they agree with you or whether they approve of you, your energy becomes calmer, more centered, and more compelling. People are drawn to those who do not seek validation but carry themselves with quiet self-belief. They listen more closely to someone who stands firmly in who they are rather than someone who is performing for acceptance. Detachment from outcomes strengthens presence because it eliminates desperation, and nothing weakens influence more than desperation. Another essential part of influence through presence is discipline. Presence is not just an energy, it is a reflection of the habits that shape your character, the way you manage your emotions, the way you control your impulses, the way you speak with intention, the way you maintain self-control under stress. Discipline creates presence because discipline builds internal order, and internal order radiates outward as stability, respect, and authority. People trust those who are disciplined because discipline is a rare trait, and rarity is always respected. Presence also comes from listening more than speaking. When you listen deeply and speak deliberately, people feel heard, and they become more receptive to your voice when you choose to use it. Performance tries to dominate the room. Presence anchors the room. Performance tries to impress. Presence allows others to breathe. Presence is quiet, but it is not invisible. It is subtle, but it is not weak. It is calm, but it is not passive. Presence is the quiet force that shapes the behavior, the energy, and the perception of everyone around you. When you build influence through presence, you begin to realize that people respond to who you are long before they respond to what you say. They feel your inner state. They feel your confidence. They feel your discipline. They feel your clarity. And it is this feeling, not your performance, that shapes their willingness to follow your direction, value your words, and align themselves with your perspective. In the end, presence is the highest form of influence because it does not rely on effort. It relies on alignment. When your internal world is calm, your external influence becomes effortless. When your mind is steady, your energy becomes powerful. When you stop performing and start embodying, you shift from trying to be influential to simply being someone others naturally listen to, follow, and respect. Chapter 13. Mastering Social Minimalism. Social minimalism is the art of reducing unnecessary interactions, conversations, and emotional entanglements so that your presence, your words, and your energy become more intentional, more controlled, and far more influential, because most people scatter their social energy across countless meaningless connections, draining themselves through constant talking, constant explaining, and constant reacting, never realizing that influence grows not by spreading yourself thin, but by becoming selective, deliberate, and disciplined in how you engage with the world. Social minimalism is not about isolation or coldness. It is about reclaiming ownership over where your attention goes and deciding consciously who receives access to your mind, your time, and your presence. Most people talk too much, interact too much, and involve themselves in conversations that drain them rather than strengthen them, and as a result, they feel overwhelmed, misunderstood, and undervalued. When you practice social minimalism, you stop forcing unnecessary connections and start conserving your energy for situations and people that truly matter. You begin to understand that influence isn't built through constant social activity, but through meaningful, high-quality interactions where your presence has room to be felt. When you reduce your social noise, your social impact increases. An important part of social minimalism is choosing silence over reaction. You do not need to respond to every opinion, every message, every invitation, or every attempt to pull you into unnecessary conversation. When you stop reacting to everything, people begin to recalibrate how they approach you. They become more thoughtful before speaking to you. They choose their words more carefully. They no longer expect you to be available for every emotional exchange. This subtle shift increases your perceived value without you having to change your personality. You simply become more intentional with your responses. Social minimalism also means removing yourself from environments where your energy is wasted, places where people gossip, complain, argue, or compete for attention. When you stop participating in low-quality conversations, your mind becomes clearer and your presence becomes stronger, because silence in the face of nonsense creates an unmistakable contrast. You begin to feel more in control of your emotional space, and the people who value depth over noise are naturally drawn to you, while those who thrive on chaos lose interest. This is not rejection, it is natural filtration. Another key part of social minimalism is being comfortable not explaining yourself. You do not need to justify your decisions, your boundaries, or your preferences. When you stop offering explanations that nobody asked for, you reclaim your power. Excessive justification is a form of social performance rooted in insecurity, while calm, unapologetic clarity is a form of confidence rooted in self-respect. A simple, "No, that doesn't work for me," creates far more authority than a long paragraph of excuses ever could. In social minimalism, brevity is power. As you minimize unnecessary conversations, you gain more space for observation. You start seeing people more clearly, their patterns, their intentions, their emotional states. When you are not rushing to speak, you become the person who understands, not the person who is trying to be understood. This shift gives you a strategic advantage in every social situation. While others expose themselves through uncontrolled speech, you quietly gather information, and the less you reveal, the more unpredictable and intriguing you become. Social minimalism transforms you into a presence that people feel rather than a sound they ignore. Social minimalism doesn't only apply to conversations, it applies to your social habits as well. You begin to choose quality over quantity, quality friendships over superficial acquaintances, quality conversations over idle chatter, quality time over endless social obligations. This selectiveness strengthens your internal stability. You stop feeling stretched thin, drained, or socially exhausted because you no longer give away your time and attention indiscriminately. You begin protecting your inner world from people who do not deserve access to it. One of the greatest benefits of social minimalism is emotional clarity. When you limit unnecessary interactions, your emotional life becomes cleaner, calmer, and more grounded. You stop internalizing other people's chaos. You stop absorbing their insecurities. You stop being pulled into their emotional storms. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly, and this clarity makes your communication more precise, your decisions more confident, and your presence more powerful. Social minimalism also builds self-respect, because every time you choose not to engage in empty conversations or draining relationships, you reinforce the belief that your energy is valuable. You treat your time as sacred. You treat your peace as essential. And over time, the world mirrors this behavior. People treat you with more respect because you treat yourself with more respect. They listen more closely because your silence has become meaningful. They value your words because you do not offer them casually. Ultimately, social minimalism transforms your influence by stripping away everything that dilutes it. When you speak less, you are heard more. When you engage less, your presence becomes more impactful. When you reveal less, you become more intriguing. When you protect your energy, your confidence strengthens. Social minimalism is not about being distant. It is about being deliberate. It is not about disconnecting from the world. It is about connecting with intention. And once you master it, you step into a new kind of social power, a quiet power, an unforced power, an influence that grows not from performing for attention, but from controlling what you give your attention to. Final chapter: the discipline of impact. Influence is not built in a moment, nor is it created through loud speeches, dramatic gestures, or constant attempts to be seen. Influence is built slowly, quietly, and intentionally through the disciplined way you carry yourself, the restraint you practice, the clarity of your decisions, and the presence you bring into every interaction. Real impact comes from what you choose not to do just as much as what you choose to do, and throughout this audiobook, you have learned that speaking less, listening deeper, controlling your emotions, and mastering silence are not just communication skills. They are disciplines that shape your identity and elevate the way the world responds to you. The discipline of impact begins with mastering your internal world. When your emotions no longer control you, when you no longer react impulsively, when you are no longer swayed by chaos or noise, you become someone others instinctively look to for guidance. Emotional stability is rare, and rarity creates value. The more grounded you become internally, the more powerful your influence becomes externally. People follow calmness. They trust calmness. They are drawn to calmness because calmness is strength in a world addicted to reaction. Impact also comes from the discipline of choosing your words with intention. When you speak only when necessary, and when every sentence you offer has weight, people begin to treat your voice differently. They listen more carefully. They reflect more deeply. They remember more clearly. Your words no longer blend into the noise of endless talking. They stand out because you do not waste them. This restraint makes your communication precise, your presence commanding, and your influence undeniable. The discipline of impact also grows through silence. Silence that unsettles those who rely on noise, silence that exposes truth, silence that forces others to reveal themselves, and silence that amplifies the power of your eventual words. Silence is not emptiness, it is mastery. It is the understanding that you do not need to fight for attention when you know how to carry it. When you allow silence to shape the rhythm of your interactions, you create a kind of tension that draws people toward your presence instead of pushing them away. Another key element of impact is the discipline of boundaries. When you protect your energy instead of giving it to everyone, when you refuse to involve yourself in meaningless conversations, when you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, and when you choose your relationships with intention, you elevate your value. People treat you with more respect when they see that you treat yourself with respect. Every boundary you hold strengthens your self-image, and every act of self-respect deepens the impact of your presence. Social minimalism, emotional discipline, intentional communication, strategic silence, steady body language, all of these practices combine to create a version of you who influences without effort, who communicates without excess, and who leaves an impression long after you exit the room. Impact is not about dominating others. It is about mastering yourself so deeply that people feel your confidence before you speak it, see your strength before you prove it, and respond to your presence without needing to understand why. The discipline of impact is ultimately about alignment. When your internal world is stable, your external influence becomes effortless. When your actions match your values, your presence becomes authentic. When your confidence comes from within instead of from performance, your communication becomes powerful without being loud and clear without being dramatic. You are no longer trying to be influential, you simply are. As you move forward, remember that influence is not built through moments of perfection, but through consistent habits. Habits of speaking less, listening more, reacting slowly, observing deeply, maintaining calm in chaos, and carrying yourself with quiet certainty. These habits, practiced daily, transform you into someone whose presence alone communicates authority, whose silence communicates strength, and whose words, once spoken, resonate with depth and intention. You do not need to be the loudest person in the room to make an impact. You simply need to be the most disciplined. Influence is earned not through noise, but through clarity. Respect is earned not through performance, but through presence. And confidence is earned not through pretending, but through mastering the way you think, speak, move, and show up in the world. Carry these lessons with you. Let them guide how you interact, how you communicate, and how you build the version of yourself that others naturally listen to, follow, and respect. Because the discipline of impact is not something you do once. It is something you become. And when you become it, you influence more by speaking less, and you leave an imprint on every room you enter, not through force, but through the undeniable strength of your disciplined presence. If you've made it to this point, it means you are committed to your growth, to your discipline, and to becoming the version of yourself who influences through presence rather than performance. And before you continue with the rest of your day, I want to remind you that this journey doesn't end here. So if this audiobook has brought you value, clarity, or strength, take a moment to engage with the content. Leave a comment sharing your biggest lesson. Like the video so the message can reach more people. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected with future releases, and save this audio so you can return to it whenever you need a reminder of the power you carry within you. Engaging with the content not only supports the channel, it reinforces your commitment to the discipline you are building. Your growth continues each time you come back to strengthen your mindset, so stay connected, stay disciplined, and remember that your presence has the power to change the way you move through the world.